Hey, this is Evelina, co-host of Love Zero Waste here. I'm hearing the church bells outside, so now it's time for our Love Zero Waste Weekly. And I will be joined shortly by Chloé Mikolajczak. She is the co-creator and host of the podcast The Burning Case. So she will be joining us in just a little tiny bit. So while we wait for her, I can tell you a bit about her background. Zero Waste Europe is also joining. That's awesome. So hello everyone. We're just waiting for Chloé to join us, and I can give you a bit of the background while we're waiting for Chloé. Together with, or in collaboration with Zero Waste Europe, we are scanning the continent of Europe for zero waste trends throughout the month of October. So we will be doing a number of lives and looking at the space of circular economy and zero waste to see what's happening in this very space. Okay, so now let's see. Invite Chloé to join us. Yay! Awesome!
Hey, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. And you?
Good. Yeah, it's super sunny here in Brussels, so it's good for the mood.
Okay, that's perfect. Perfect Friday afternoon mood. So this is Chloé. I just told everybody a bit about the background of what we're doing here. So for those of you who join now, we are throughout the month of October, we are in partnership with Zero Waste Europe, scanning the continent of Europe for zero waste trends. And we really wanted to talk to you, Chloé. I can also tell you a bit about her because some of you might recognize Chloé also from our recent episode of Love Zero Waste, the podcast. We did an episode on e-waste, and we had the pleasure of interviewing you, and we really wanted to talk to you again. So now is a very good time because recently you launched a podcast, The Burning Case.
Yep.
And I started listening to the other day, and the third episode really caught my attention because it's about lobbying and policy making on an EU level. And it's I'm not very much I'm not very knowledgeable when it comes to policymaking, so this was like the perfect lobbying and policymaking 101, like getting to know maybe not so very pretty side of lobbying.
I'm glad you found it interesting.
Yeah. So how's it been going so far with the podcast and this episode?
It's been going well. I mean, it's a whole new adventure, so we're kind of learning as we going. Everything from inviting guests to finding topics to brainstorming the questions and doing the editing. It's a learning curve, but it's nice. It's really interesting, and it was just I really wanted to start something where we could discuss topics that I didn't see on other podcasts, so a lot related to policymaking. So kind of also for the people that want to take their activism to the next level or just their commitment. So going beyond individual change and also being informed about what can we do at a systemic level.
Yeah, all super important topics. Really fantastic. Good job. So in the recent episode was that I mentioned is it as bad as it sounds? Unraveling lobbying. So for those of you who haven't heard it, you should when we finish this live in about 20 minutes, you could go onto your wherever you listen to podcasts and check it out. It's really good introduction to lobbying, according to my humble opinion.
Thanks.
So let's start somewhere with lobbying and policymaking. For those of our listeners, viewers who don't know what that is, can you explain what it's about?
Well, lobbying traditionally, it's not a bad thing. The term was kind of created when in the UK some people were trying to influence the policymakers, and so they were waiting to meet them in the lobby. So that's kind of how the term got created. But it's a practice that has been happening all over history. Essentially it's citizens and organizations that are discussing with policymakers and that are trying to push their agenda or defend their interest to policymakers. So it's not a bad thing, technically. It's just what it has become that can be dangerous and be a threat to democracy, essentially.
Okay, so that's where we are right now. And also the sphere of zero waste and circular economy is kind of feeling this, that big oil companies, for example, are trying to sabotage or make life difficult for politicians that want to kind of have a stricter laws or policy. And you talk about a bit about that in the podcast as well. So what would you say are some of the most significant policies that influence zero waste and the circular economy on a European level?
Well, I think it would have to be the Circular Economy Action Plan that was adopted in March this year, because it's the biggest and most comprehensive policy related to waste and circular economy in a long time, and it includes a lot of things, and it's quite general, because then a lot of the actual policies, the concrete actions, are going to be developed at a later stage. But this would have to be it. So it's one of the pillars of the Green Deal, just like, you know, the biodiversity strategy or the agricultural strategy. So it's one of the main pillars of the Green Deal strategy. And I think when it comes to waste and circular economy, it's definitely the biggest and most important one, for sure.
And how do you think that we will notice that there is this policy suggestion now? How will we as citizens notice this in the future, or as businesses or startups? How will we notice it?
I guess it will depend on which topic, because for instance, if you take fashion, for instance, it's mentioned in the Circular Economy Action Plan, but there's not much happening around fashion at the moment. So it's going to take probably a few more years for citizens to see an impact on businesses. But something quite concrete, for instance, on products and repairable products, we have already started. I mean, the Commission has already started the process of regulating smartphones. So it's a process which is called eco-design, and it takes quite a while, but it has started. And what we are pushing for instance, at Right to Repair Europe, but you know, other NGOs are pushing for similar things, is for smartphones to be repairable and durable. And so this is something that hopefully citizens will be able to see very soon. We are also pushing for a repairability index. So something quite similar to the energy label that you see on your products, you know, the ABCG, et cetera, et cetera. We're pushing for something similar, but on repairability. And the idea is that consumers will be able to choose repairable products at the point of purchase to avoid buying stuff that are non-repairable and then generating waste. So I think this typically is something that will be felt quite soon by the citizen. But yeah, it really depends on which category of products and of waste you are.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think is, if you look even further, like maybe towards the Green New Deal or even further, what do you see is on the horizon? What can we expect? Like, because I think the other day when the targets were set to 60% reduction of CO2, that was kind of a surprise for a lot of people. Yeah. Like, can we expect even more positive things to happen, or what do you think is on the horizon?
Well, it really depends, because like the thing is, it's a positive surprise that the Parliament voted for 60%, but it's not a set target, because now the European Council, which is essentially the European government, they need to agree on that target. And so this is going to be what is called a trilogue, so a discussion and negotiations between the Commission, the Parliament, and the Council. And the thing is, within the European countries, there are quite a few that have traditionally been against more ambitious climate measures, because they're really dependent on coal. So I'm thinking of Poland, for instance. So while it is a positive surprise, it might not end up being so positive. It really depends on the outcomes of these negotiations. But yeah, I guess in different elements, there could be good surprises coming up, whether it's when it comes to agriculture, or just, for instance, the Mercosur has been rejected by the European Parliament as well as it stands. So this is also a positive surprise. But there's so many different streams of topics of environmental sustainability issues. And the thing is, the key for me, at least, I think, is trying to put pressure on almost each of them, so that policymakers are not able to say, see, we voted for 60% here, so this is a good news, and then on the side, they just agree on something that is very terrible, for instance. So it's really that, balance of trying to maintain the pressure on the different streams of topics, but it's not easy. So we'll see in the coming few months what it looks like.
Yeah, there's a lot of work for everybody involved to get this going, I suppose. So talking about the not so pretty side of lobbying again, for example, you mentioned this, or one of your guests in the podcast, Lala Hakumadadji from the Corporate Europe Observatory. She speaks about this. So can you describe a bit what the lobby looks like that is working against zero waste and circular economy?
Yeah, well, once again, it really depends on the products, but just an example, for instance, if you're talking about electronics, it could be the lobby of appliances, or the lobby of, electrical products, for instance. And so what they might do is they'll probably send letters to policymakers, or they'll just publish an op-ed expressing their views on a certain policy, and through this way, they manage to put pressure on policymakers. Or another strategy is, for instance, the lobby of plastic, of single-use plastic. What they did during the pandemic, at the very beginning of the pandemic, is that they kind of made a little bit of noise asking the Commission to postpone the legislation on single-use plastics, because they were saying that in times of pandemic, we need single-use plastics. So it wasn't a right time to implement this new regulation that was essentially banning a list of 10 products. So these are the different things that they can do. There are, of course, many, many more. They can meet policymakers outside of office hours. They can put, as our first guest in the podcast explains it, they can put a lot of their people on expert groups. So at the end of the day, the expert bodies that provide recommendations, a lot of them are industries. And we've seen this, for instance, in the case of the Dieselgate. I don't know if you remember, but where, car manufacturers were kind of playing around with the emission testing and cheating. Well, there was this whole issue at the EU level.
No, I know. Okay.
Do you remember? Yeah, and they realized that I think it was between 60 to 70% of advisory groups on cars and cars pollution were made of industry people. So these are all, like, not all, of course, but some of the tactics that lobbyists can use at EU level. And let's just remind that there's between 25,000 to 30,000 lobbyists here in Brussels. So it's huge. And on the other side, you've got, the NGOs and the civil society and the people. And there's really a few compared to the industry lobbies and the lobby firms. So it's not an equal fight.
Okay. So what could we do as citizens to become more powerful, to kind of strengthen our voice in this context?
Well, I think there's quite a lot of things that we can do, and I think the first one is getting informed, because it's a bit cheesy to say that, but knowledge is power. So until we actually know about what's happening, we won't be able to do much. And the problem is, here in Europe, there's not a lot of coverage from mainstream media. So if you take, I don't know, what's a big media in Germany or in France, there's very little coverage about what's happening at the EU level, except when there's something, I don't know, really bad, like a scandal. Then, of course, they'll report on it. But otherwise, there's very little coverage. So that keeps most of European citizens in the dark in regards to what happens in Brussels. And then there are the EU media, which there's, a few platforms, a few media. And the problem with these guys is that most of them are sellouts. So the business model is actually organizing conferences with policymakers and paid by businesses. So they're not all of them, but some of them are just not a reliable source of information. So this is kind of what we're trying to do with the burning cases, to explain this concept, explain these policies that can be sometimes very complicated. But that's, I think, a first step, and it's not easy. So this is why we need people, whether it's on social media or in mainstream media, that really mainstream this concept and explains them and reports on what's happening. And then it's, as our second guest says it on the episode about lobbying, it's about using the whole package of tools that we can use as citizens. And the main problem is that us as citizens, we've kind of lost touch with democracy and how it works. So we have a tendency, we are asked to vote once every 5 years. And in between, we're not told that we can actually influence policymaking in between these 5 years. It's just you vote, you're not happy with the results, bummer, I'll vote again in 5 years, and that's it. But it's not the case. You can actually do quite a lot of things. It's just about knowing first that you can do them, and then actually knowing the tools. And this is not easy because we're not told the tools in schools. We are not told about these democratic tools in universities, or whatever, higher education, or not even higher education, just in general schools. So it really is about citizens informing themselves, and this is not always easy. And this is one of the reasons why we've created the burning case.
Yeah, I think that's super important. But I was also very encouraged by the episode, like thinking of it as policymaking as, or kind of influencing or going. I think your second guest talks also about, his name is Alberto Alemano, and his organization is The Good Lobby. And he talks about going beyond click activism, beyond signing online petitions, which you should probably also do. But then what are the actual concrete steps that you can kind of go into?
There's a mix. There's not one thing. So the problem is with lobbying is that it really depends at which stage of a policy development you're at, because we live in this environment of, we have a 3 seconds attention span. We are not used to follow a process anymore, and a process can take months. And so we just focus on, there's a vote tomorrow, let's put pressure, which is great. But in order to really be efficient, and Alberto explains it really well in the podcast, is that we need to kind of follow all these different steps and use different tools for each different steps. So to give you an example, it's great to put a lot of pressure on an MEP 2 days before a vote, but it's also great if a few weeks before that, he has been sent a policy document explaining why he should vote this way or this way. It's also great if other MEPs from his political group, go to him and say, we've received a lot of emails, etc., asking for a 60% target. It's great if when the council will be negotiating this target, we have people in every country where, they might not be so supportive of the 60% target. We have people putting pressure on the national governments, whether it's protesting, it's organizing, it's doing a bunch of different actions. So it really depends on which steps you're at. But as Alberto was saying, it's a mix of digital and offline. So a lot of digital stuff, such as social media, such as putting pressure through mainstream media, such as writing a petition, or, sending letters with dozens, thousands of people who signed it. But it's also about actually meeting these people, putting pressure on them, going into the streets, advocating for a different system. There's all these different things that people can do, but they're not necessarily aware that they can do these things.
Mm-hmm. And is there anything that could be translated specifically into the zero waste or circular economy context, like securing the ban on single-use plastics, for example? Is there anything that is specific to zero waste?
Not that I think of. I think these strategies are relevant for any policies, or at least every sustainability policies. I think maybe one thing or two things that we should remind ourselves is that we shouldn't settle for non-ambitious policies. And it was great, to have a list of 10 items that are going to be banned in the single-use plastic directive. But it's insane to think that this is what we have come to consider as a good policy, because it's not good enough. We need more than a ban on these 10 items, especially a ban that has loopholes that industry can use to still sell these items. So first of all, I think it's really important for anyone who is an activist or not an activist, just someone who wants a change, to remember that we shouldn't settle for non-ambitious policies, and also to remember to not only advocate for concrete change, so I want this target, I want these policies, I want these bans, but also that we need a change of system in general. And it's not because we're working within a system to try to influence it and change it that we shouldn't also say, but the system should change. We need a different way of doing democracy. We need a different way of developing policies. So because this is probably going to take a while, right now I'm focusing on what I can do, which is pass these bills in this system. But on the side, I'm also saying that the system should change, because right now it's not working the way it should. So I think this, for me, I know it's not specific to zero waste, but I think it's quite important to remember, because otherwise you kind of fall in a trap of being almost complacent with the system and saying, yeah, sure, we're just going to work with it and accept all its flaws, but it's a flawed system.
That's a really good wrap up, I think, that we shouldn't be content with what we are presented, but really demand better. We can do better than this. We need to do better for the planet and for future generations as well.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Chloe, for joining us today for Love Zero Waste Weekly. This recording has been a collaboration with Zero Waste Europe, where we are scanning Europe for trends within the zero waste space during the month of October. So thank you again, and everybody go listen to The Burning Case right now.
Thanks.
And I wish you a lovely weekend, Chloe.
Thank you. Care. You too. Have a lovely day. Bye.
Bye.